Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at some important stories, of course, with reference to what is going on in the international arena and, of course, how Pakistan is also factoring in the equation. There is, of course, a very important meetup and the visit of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the US, where he's met with his counterpart, and a number of important meetings have, of course, been held. And this was much awaited, an event that has been discussed by the US previously, as well as a reference to being one of the most important foreign policy events in the recent future before this visit took place, in which there was also a visit to by a top US diplomat to China as well. And so this is important when we take a look at the overall situation and relationship between the US and India and the US and China. But it's also important in terms of Pakistan's perspective and what impact this is going to have. We know, of course, that there has been a lot of a strategic partnership reliance and emphasis with regards to the US and India's partnership by the US in terms of the engagement or countering the effects of China in the region. But at the same time, we also know that in a world that we move ahead with global challenges, it's important for each country to foster its relationship, and even perhaps on a certain level, the US and China must also perceive that importance. But we know for a fact that at the moment, the kind of statements that we've been hearing coming from the US in this particular visit are slightly concerning, especially when we talk about the counter-terrorism efforts that were pointed towards, particularly in Pakistan, and the fact that a joint statement coming from the two sides called for the territory of Pakistan not to be used for launching attacks on any other soil or any other territory. There was also talk of use of terrorist proxies, and then, of course, with reference to what has happened in terms of how Pakistan's role has been in the past against the fight of terrorism, and allegedly talking about extremist groups' presence within Pakistan, including Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed. And this is important in terms of the kind of sacrifice that Pakistan has given in the war against terrorism, particularly being an ally of the US, and the numerous amounts of sacrifice that we've given, and not less in the number of lives that we have lost in this fight. And so moving forward, we're going to be taking a look at what this means, or what impact this will hold for Pakistan. We also know that the foreign minister, in response to this statement, has talked about how we do not need to be insecure about the relationship between the US and India. And at this point in time, Pakistan must focus on its own priorities instead of any sort of international achievements. And the way that we want to process any issues, be it counterterrorism, needs to be on our own rules and on the way that we want to approach it, and not because somebody talked about this in a statement or the other. He also talked about how perhaps this is something that is very easy to do, make it part of any statement, talk about how work should be done. But in fact, moving forward with the nuances that are involved in actually making efforts towards counterterrorism is the difficult part, and Pakistan needs to be focusing on all of that and whatever is in its own interest at the moment, rather than take note of such statements and be concerned particularly about them. But we'll focus on what this means and speak more about what sort of movement would be followed up by Pakistan with reference to such statements, and how Pakistan needs to navigate the perception perhaps that is being built. That will be the focus of our first segment, and the next one is going to take a look at the way that Pakistan is also dealing against terrorism at home. There has been, of course, a spike of terrorist activities, particularly after the US troop withdrawal in Afghanistan and the takeover of the Afghan Taliban regime. We've known in the past also that the Afghan Taliban regime have played a certain role with the negotiations with TTP, and this has been important in terms of moving forward with certain ceasefires. But then moving forward, it was important for us to also understand how that strategy wasn't working for us, and the way that the TTP moved ahead with calling off the ceasefire and targeting state institutions and security agencies. It has been decided that there will be no negotiations with terrorists, something that was reiterated by the foreign minister as well and the top leadership of the country. But especially now, when we take a look at a fresh offer that is being put forward for mediation by the Afghan Taliban, of course, this has been rejected by the Pakistan side, but we want to further further explore in the perspective of what has happened previously and the role that Afghan Taliban have played, and how exactly can this role then will be navigated in terms of counter-terrorism efforts both at home and across the border as well, and what sort of approaches Pakistan will be taking with reference to both Afghan Taliban and the TTP, because of course it seems at the moment dialogue is not an option and we're sticking to this stance, but moving ahead, will there be any sort of re-evaluation of this strategy and what possibilities exist on that route? So that is going to be our discussion in the next segment of the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi. We've also been joined in our studios by former Foreign Secretary and former Ambassador, Mr. Jauhar Saleem. Thank you very much, Jauhar Sahab, for being a part of the discussion. We've also been joined online by Member National Planning Commission, Dr. Ishtiaq, who joined us on Skype. Thank you very much, Dr. Ishtiaq, for being a part of the discussion today. Jauhar Sahab, I'll start with you in terms of where we stand today and what sort of an analysis do you think is in order, especially in terms of this recent visit of the Prime Minister of India to the US and the interactions that have followed. And we'll look more closely at the statements that have been made towards counterterrorism efforts in Pakistan. But in a broader sense, do you think that there is significant move forward in terms of the cooperation between the US and India, more so than there has been in the past, and especially so in terms of any sort of counter efforts towards China?
There has been a clear trajectory in recent years. India and the US, they have been moving closer. There are various reasons for that. There are the strategic reasons we know about the US Asia pivot. They together they have a strategy to counter China's influence within their own perspective. Then again, India is seen as a rising economic power. We have to remember that India's exports, they are set to touch about $900 billion this financial year. Even last financial year, they were $770 billion. And more than half of that is the exports and services, where they have a very close collaboration with some of the top US companies. Then again, the NRIs, Indian NRIs based in the US, they have significant influence. Many of them are CEOs of some of the top companies of the world, not just the US. So all these factors, they are basically helping, facilitating a closer cooperation between the two countries. Now this visit is quite significant. Prime Minister Modi, as we know, at one point was blacklisted by the US, not even eligible for a US visa because of his human rights record. That was after the 2002 massacre in Gujarat when he was the chief minister. And subsequently that stayed on for many years. In fact, until the time he became the Prime Minister, he was elected the Prime Minister. But now it seems to have all changed. But
even though the human rights situation hasn't changed at all.
That's true. But then when we have to remember, you see, international relations do not work on a confluence of values or ideals or principles. It primarily works on a confluence of interests. And the interests of the US and India, I mean, we see a greater alignment than perhaps at any point in the past decades. So many people would not be surprised by, because the statement that they've issued after the meetings, it's a 58 points statement, a very lengthy, very comprehensive statement encompassing all the various facets of relations. But unfortunately, it has made some very biased, very unfair references to Pakistan. The world knows that Pakistan has greatly contributed to the international efforts against global terrorism. The world knows the sacrifices we have made in terms of life, in terms of our soldiers, in terms of innocent lives of our civilians, tens of thousands. The world knows about the $140 billion or more of economic losses that we have suffered. And these are just direct economic losses, and that could be probably even greater. Despite that, we have to remember that, as I said, international politics is based on the realities of interest and counter-interest. So, so all those facts seem to have been totally ignored and undermined by what has been said in this statement. However, there's another facet to it, and that is that I think it should also make us think in terms of how to further revitalize our foreign policy, because we have to have a more multidimensional, a more holistic, a more contextual approach in terms of our foreign policy priorities. Because for many years, what we've seen in the past is that there has been a great disconnect between our economic reality, between our economic policy and our foreign policy. That does not work. It does not work for the country, and it does not work for the world that we are living in, because here these two realities are very much intertwined. So I think in some ways it's another wake-up call. So we have to, while of course, like the foreign minister, the defense minister, they're very rightly stated and very rightly highlighted the unfairness and the bias of this statement. But at the same time, I think it's important, foreign minister in particular has said that, like terrorism is a common problem. And we need cooperation rather than playing politics, which is very true. You can't play geopolitics with that. But at the same time, we also have to be aware of the realities on the ground in terms of how countries act and react, how countries can ignore basic facts sometimes, how countries do not make decisions on the basis of even shared values or even shared ideals, but rather on terms of stark realities or interests. So we have to be more mindful of that as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We'll move on to Dr. Ishtiaq also, and before that we're going to take a look at what Jauhar Sahab you were speaking about, especially in terms of what the foreign minister has said at the floor of the House today, and so we'll hear that first before we move on with further discussion.
तो कल भी अपने ही बलबूते पे खड़ा था और आज भी अपने ही बलबूते पे खड़ा है, और इंशाअल्लाह ताला हम हमेशा अपने ही तौर पे आगे भरते रहेंगे। पाकिस्तान इस दहशतगर्दी का जो जंग हुआ है इसका सबसे ज़्यादा मुतासिर, तो हम क्यों नहीं चाहेंगे कि हम दहशतगर्दी का खात्मा करें।
And that was, of course, a discussion post what has been coming out from the visit of the Indian Prime Minister to the US and the joint statement that has followed. Dr. Ishtiaq, it's important in terms of how particularly this statement has been coming in with reference to Pakistan's soil not being used against any other territory, the fact that there are allegedly terrorist groups or extremist groups presence in Pakistan, and that there is use of terrorist proxies, and of course just emphasizing on what more Pakistan needs to be doing in terms of its counterterrorism efforts globally. And as Jauhar Sahab was pointing out previously as well, Pakistan has already paid such high costs on so many levels and has continued to work towards counterterrorism efforts both at home and of course previously in the war against terrorism as well. So when we take a look at this particular statement, I understand what the foreign minister is saying for us not to be insecure about this relationship or not be concerned with this matter and not reprioritize whatever it is that we need to focus on at home at the moment. But what impact or significance do you think this statement will still hold in terms of the way that Pakistan is perceived internationally, especially when this is coming in from the US and India, in terms of what else Pakistan needs to be doing?
Well, I have gone through the joint statement. It is unusually long. I think it has around 60 different sections. And one of those sections, I think half of it deals with the statement on Pakistan and terrorism. And I think this is a very old issue. It was long settled. I remember 19 years ago in 2004, that was in the context of the war on terror, that the then President Musharraf issued a statement that became an official statement, an official stand of Pakistan, that Pakistan will not allow any group or individual to use its soil to conduct terrorism anywhere in the world, in the neighborhood, anywhere in the world. So that was a formal statement, and I think we were committed to that. As far as this joint statement and reiteration of the issue is concerned, I think there are two issues that are important. One, somehow India is obsessed with this terrorism linking with Pakistan. I think that obsession is something that India itself has to deal with, but the reality does not conform to this. Number two, if you go back to 1993 or so, we had fought together a decade-long war in Afghanistan again, and then within years, United States had imposed sanctions on Pakistan. So US is kind of an ally, a unique superpower in history that uses the allies and then abandons it and then joins the other forces which were fighting against it in the previous decade or so. Likewise, in the past 2 years, the way American-Pakistani relationship has come down, precisely not because Pakistanis want it so, but the Americans, wherever they have gone, 20 years war in Afghanistan, and suddenly they are defeated in this war, not because we played any role in it. So once they are gone, they are cementing ties with India. These ties were being cemented before also, but this kind of a statement which does not have any relevance. I think the only odd thing that I find in this statement is this reference to terrorism and relating it to Pakistan. That's very unfortunate.
Absolutely. And Farrukh, the important aspect over here would also be in terms of taking a look at the relationship that Pakistan also enjoys with the US. And we've talked about this previously as well, how there is a lot of historic depth to this relationship, and we value it greatly, especially when there was discussion around decoupling of the world order and when we move forward, especially in terms of our relationship with China. And so when we talk about the very valuable relationship that we hold with the US, and the fact that each country has, of course, their own particular relationship with other countries, is it still not a matter of concern for us that the ties between the US and India are deepening, or that the US will seek to foster this relationship further, especially in relation to a collective response perhaps towards China? Should Pakistan be pursuing itself independently in its relationship with the US and not be concerned particularly about the US and India's ties?
Yeah, Sana, I think that Pakistan has been actually pursuing independent foreign policy towards the US, and as our American peers actually keep on reminding us that both US-India relation and Pakistan-US relations are independent of each other, because both have been dehyphenated. So then I don't understand this Indian immature desire to drag Pakistan into every bilateral statement, right? Sadly, as Professor Ishtiaq was actually talking about this, this statement, this component on Pakistan is essentially the same template that was prepared after Mumbai. And after every meeting with the US president, because they have this, Indian side actually works with the American side to prepare the statement, and in that this component is always incorporated. There are a couple of groups that are also mentioned. Then Pakistan is also, the same calls are made ad nauseum, and it has been going on. So I don't understand a country that claims to be regional hegemon, or security provider, who has to obsess about a country that it says that it does not care about, right? Some kind of immaturity that has gripped India, Modi's India, is on display. Two very interesting things I have to remind you of. One, President Obama, former President Obama's book, which actually speaks about India's habit of forgetting all nuances whenever it comes to Pakistan and becoming, I mean, you're talking about the most populous country in the world, all of a sudden transforming into a jingoistic country, right? and they are jingoistic. I don't understand this personality or inferiority complex of a country that is already actually gaining a lot. Now, regarding the importance of this meeting, I don't think it is very important meeting. Of course, you have seen tchotchkes that are being, offered to India. But the problem at this moment is that with this visit, the day Narendra Modi comes back to India after this visit, he enters the lame duck period, when he is going to be obsessed only about one thing: winning the next election. That is approaching very fast. So at this moment, I think that he won't be able to get a lot. There are 2 or 3 things which are substantial. This whole deal about engines, jet engines being made in India, and of course, who gets the money? It is not India that gets the money, right? So it is also bargaining. Similarly, the Artemis Accord or agreement, and then India keeps on talking about restrictions being lifted on this limited, visa for technocrats. So that is all that we are looking at this moment. So they will have the song and dance. They will keep on telling you that a lot has been achieved. America's businesses will get money. Narendra Modi will get the kind of outsized respect that he never deserved in the first place, even in his own country. But then he is going to come back. Perhaps someday he can also claim that he won a World Cup in America. But after that, it is actually pure politics, because in India today, in Patna, the opposition parties have united, with the exception of AAP. So they are going to actually pose a serious challenge to Narendra Modi's politics, which is already getting tired. So I don't think that there is a lot to be read here. It is the old template that Indians, because they are so obsessed about Pakistan, because they are so insecure, they keep on repeating it every time their Prime Minister meets America's President. So it will continue to happen.
Okay. Jauhar, the statement coming in from the former president of the US, Mr. Barack Obama, is also important. He talks about how the issues of the treatment of ethnic minorities within India, or the fact that there are undemocratic practices within India, need to be part of the conversation that we take on globally as well, or part of the conversation that the US needs to talk about. But he also points out again to the kind of factors and variables that impact the relationship that you were earlier also pointing to us in terms of the interest of different countries. But what do you think will be that point, perhaps, where this issue with regards to how India is interacting with its own minorities at home, or what is going on in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, will eventually trickle into the relationship between the US and India as well? And what do you think possibly can Pakistan do in terms of highlighting this? I know that we do that on all platforms, but it doesn't seem to be enough for this to have an impact.
I think that's a very important point. But what we have seen so far is that former Prime Minister Obama has mentioned that. Of course, now he can, because he's not the president anymore. So he could be more objective in terms of his comments on such issues. But it has been totally ignored, apparently, by this administration, or at least for most part. In the past, there has been talk about Indian government's treatment of its minorities, the human rights violations, the extremism which is rising in India. And we actually saw in the last few years that the international media really picked on it and highlighted it to a great extent. Even what was happening in the occupied Jammu and Kashmir. It was highlighted probably more than I've seen in decades in the last some years. But despite that, now what we see is that most Western countries seem to have, in some ways, moved on. None of those countries have qualified their cooperation, particularly the economic cooperation, in terms of India's improving that human rights record, or its treatments of its minorities and all those issues, related issues, or what they have been doing in the occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And this is the reality that I was pointing out to, that in today's world, sometimes the economic interests, they trump a lot of other considerations. Although countries talk about values, particularly, for instance, European countries. Many European countries, it is supposed to be a cornerstone of their policies to promote and protect human rights everywhere in the world. At the same time, when it comes to India, and it's very interesting, sometimes even former Western leaders, like former Australian Prime Minister, one of the former Australian Prime Minister recently mentioned in an interview that, okay, you know, when it comes to India, then it's a totally different language and it's a totally different consideration, and then we start ignoring. So the hypocrisy of it all is very evident. But at the same time, to expect that the mood will change and eventually there will be more importance or better focus on that, and the impress upon India to a greater extent to rectify some of those policies or to improve its human rights record, I think that would be a little ambitious. And as far as Pakistan is concerned, what we have done in this regard to highlight all these issues, to bring or attract world's attention to what is happening in India, I think we did a good job of it.
Okay.
But where we could do better is to also anticipate that, okay, you know, this is what we can do. This is, and we were just not alone. The international media did it this time. In the last few years, they did it. And they did to extent that it now happened before, but I think at least in recent decades. But despite that,
but when you say we did a good job, what is the indicator or measure of that?
the measure of that is that how much was part of public debate in major countries of the world, in major capitals of the world.
Okay.
Even when it appeared in media so frequently, it had something to do with the fact that we had kept that debate alive. You know, all over the world, our embassies, you know, like our diplomats, they, you know, they kept the interlocutors informed. Not just the interlocutors, the parliamentarians, the media in those countries. I was ambassador, for example, in Italy and Germany prior to that in the last 7-8 years, and I think we tried our best and a great deal, and the effort was in no way underwhelming. But at the same time, in particular, I can say that because I was there. You know, both sides, because I was there as ambassador as well. So I know what was happening there. You see, people in their private conversations, they would, you know, they would sympathize with, you know, like with our stance, with our position, and sort of, you know, our perspective. But in their public comments, you know, they would refrain from making any first of all, making any public comments, or they'd be very, very guarded, you know. And sometimes they would even share that, look, you know, we know what is happening there and everything, but, you know, look, these are the realities, the political realities, the strategic realities, and the economic realities. So I think that is what I was pointing towards as well, that in terms, if we have to really make our foreign policy more effective, then we also have to, you know, like keep in view the fact that, look, okay, the foreign policy does not operate in a vacuum. You know, what is your economic traction, what is your economic weight is very important, first of all. What are your economic relations with other countries is very important, you know. And then again, in today's world, you know, like the weight of your diaspora abroad sometimes becomes very important. You know, the weight that you have in international media becomes very important. India has a huge advantage of this, Bollywood as well, because it has been promoting their soft image everywhere. Branding, country branding is very important in today's world.
Yeah, but
you know?
Bollywood is dead, sir.
Well, I mean, we can say that, but
yeah, but Indians actually believe that it is dead. Well, they're talking about regional, you know, cinema.
That might be the case. But in terms of soft power, you see, there's so many countries in the world. You look at Netflix today. You know how many Indian programs are appearing on Netflix?
That I agree. But there are Western, you know, movies or dramas that are made in India.
Yeah, whatever.
But they're not Hollywood.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. The whole point is whatever is contributing to exactly the soft power.
Or smart power, for that matter.
Yeah, exactly. So that is basically, and I think that is where we need to focus as well, because we have a lot of assets and attributes, but you know, like the world has a very unidimensional sort of, approach or image of Pakistan. That is what needs to be changed as well. And that diplomacy needs that support.
Right.
That support of soft power as well.
Absolutely, and that is much needed. Dr. Ishtiaq, there is also, of course, the concern that whenever we talk about the US-India relationship, there is talk about how this is in terms of containment of China, and that this is why there is an increased cooperation between the two countries. And that may be so, but in terms of a kind of collective response that may possibly be seen, especially in terms of US's interests with regards to China, do you think that's possible for issues such as that of Taiwan, for India and the US to actually publicly come out and talk about these issues or have some sort of response, given the fact, of course, that India has refrained from doing that in the past? Will that possibly be something that is an expectation from this relationship?
I think, we are living in a world which is very complex. It is not, like crystal clear as it used to be during the Cold War when there were only two poles. Now it's a multipolar world, and it is again, there is so much diffusion. So at some level, you can see some kind of a rivalry between United States and China. But at other levels, there are areas of competition and even cooperation. And there is great scope of cooperation as well. Likewise, it's not that India is just aligning itself with the United States and both of are just conspiring against China at all. Over Ukraine, you can see that there is enormous similarity in the stances that India has taken and China has taken. So we live in a very complex world, and I think we should assess it in an equally complex manner. I would like to also comment, on the topic under discussion. And I think Pakistan also, I agree with the former Foreign Secretary that we should, link our foreign policy with the current economic realities, and public policy also should conform to these realities. But I think I noticed some kind of a change underway, whereby we are engaging with all the great powers, including China, United States, countries in the region. And recent actually days, we have seen a major shift in terms of approaching the Gulf, Arab Gulf, which are our allies, for greater investment into development projects in Pakistan. So countries' foreign policies continue to reshape according to the emerging realities, and I think Pakistan is not an exception. Second, and I think that is extremely important, economic interests are important. New realities and our conformity with those realities, given the economic and political and social conditions, is important. But we can never compromise on long-standing national issues. And I think the topmost priority for us, especially in response to this joint statement, is that we need to gear up our national discourse internationally, that there is a settler colonialism going on behalf of India and its terrorist leader. And I think Sana and other guests, if I say that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is a war criminal, not only in Gujarat, elsewhere in India when it comes to minorities, and especially an issue which is very core to our hearts, that is Kashmir. And I think in response to what has happened in Washington, we need to project the settler colonialism practice of India in the last 3+ years.
Right, absolutely. And Farrukh, this is important in terms of the role that Pakistan has been playing to make sure that the world knows what's going on, and to make sure that whatever's going on, especially in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, is highlighted. But in reference to what Jauhar was earlier saying on what we need to showcase in terms of Pakistan's own soft image, do you think that perhaps we're focusing more on highlighting the negatives of India, what is going on wrong over there, more so than we're highlighting whatever's been done right at Pakistan to make sure that our voice has more weight?
Right, Sana, I think first of all, it depends on which point you are coming from, which position are you coming from, right? First of all, I want to actually talk about a couple of assumptions that are important to address. Okay. For example, this idea that we are living in a multipolar world. I think that the word that would suit us right now, the world right now, is bipolar disorder. Every country is going through that, multiple personality syndrome, where one minute you have Trump, the other minute you have Biden, Narendra Modi, then Congress, similar kind of, positions or tug of war within the countries. The second one is, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. So I think that the thing about this reality is that you keep on assuming a lot and things keep on changing very quickly, right? Even right now, everyone keeps on lobbying. We say that America doesn't condemn what India is doing, and I agree with that, right? And we somehow keep on telling ourselves that it is, proof of India's might. But, off late, in past 20 years, there must be a lot of bad campaigns about Pakistan. But how many governments have actually lent their voices to that campaign? Never, right? This is not how diplomacy works. So they have to try to woo everybody, and they keep on doing it. And simultaneously, remember that don't take Americans for fools. On one side, Narendra Modi is there. On the other, remember I told you that the great idea, shining idea India came up with compared to BRI was what? Adani. Adani actually went to various countries and actually bought things. And then we saw a shot that actually exposed what kind of thing it is made of. And now, while Modi was in America, US Justice Department has written a letter to the consumers or the investors in Adani Group to actually reveal what kind of conversation the company had with them, right? So Americans also, keep on focusing on all these matters. I'm not saying that they are the best foreign policy in the world. They are not. India has its might, but with every single day, because of Modi, it costs them more and more. And I gave you an example of Pegasus software. They had to buy it from Israel. Only money could not buy it. They had to actually ensure that they had to vote in support of Israel as well. So they keep on using all these matters, but on the other side, when you're talking about soft power, India's current government has ensured India keeps on losing and bleeding its soft power. We should be building our soft power. We might be able to. We just came out of a war. Then we coming out of an economic disaster-like situation. We'll keep on building on it.
Yeah.
But I think Ambassador Jauhar is right when he says that we accomplished a lot. Remember, the world would have never looked at Kashmir had we not been there, reminding them, calling out their hypocrisy, and showing them that human rights is an important issue as well.
Absolutely, and that's of course something that Pakistan has done. So we're going to be moving on to our next segment, in which we're going to be taking a look at the issues at home with reference to cross-border terrorism, and also in terms of the spike in terrorist activities within the country as well, and of course our strategy to deal with the TTP and the relationship or the role that can be played by the Afghan Taliban in this regard. Jauhar Sahab, of course, the offer of mediation, a fresh one, has again been rejected, and it seems that Pakistan is sticking to its stance of not negotiating with the terrorists at all. But in terms of whatever role that previously has been played by the Afghan Taliban, especially in our conversations with the TTP, and then of course at the moment where we stand today and the way that we need to counter these threats at home, do you think that there is perhaps any value addition that can be done by the Afghan Taliban in of how we're looking to approach the TTP or of course our relationship with the Afghan Taliban?
Definitely, and I think we have been calling upon them, and we have been sort of, in our various contacts, emphasizing that as well. The most important thing is for them to ensure that their soil, the Afghan soil, is not used as a haven or a base by any terrorist groups, including TTP. And that is what we have been urging upon them, even sort of, in many cases, we know that the terrorist attacks, when they do take place, many times there is instances where across the border, that's where their backup or logistic support, or in terms of where sometimes the perpetrators come from as well. So I think the greatest value they can add is by ensuring that. And the fact is that we have been given assurances, reassurances in the past as well. And we hope that they will live up to their promise and strictly ensure that.
Okay. Dr. Ishtiaq, there's also, of course, the fact that when we talk about how we have dealt with the TTP, there is criticism of what the previous regime has done so in this regard, or the kind of policies or approach that has been taken, and the kind of effect that has had on what we're dealing with today. But do you think that there is any further reevaluation or reflection that needs to be done in terms of our approach to the TTP or other terrorist organizations within the country, in terms of being able to approach the issue of terrorism at home, because we've done so successfully in the past? Do you think that that is perhaps the way forward moving on as well, or there needs to be certain measures that can be added?
Be zero tolerance when it comes to terrorism, and I agree with the former Foreign Secretary that we need to utilize the diplomatic channels in negotiating some kind of a via media with the Taliban-led government in Afghanistan. And I think there are three channels that we can use. Number one is diplomatic. Despite all problems throughout history, even like post-jihad 1990s and beyond, Pakistan has always dealt with the Afghan regime a constructive dialogue that we have pursued despite the problems that we have seen over time. And so is the case with the Taliban. I think bilateral dialogue, bilateral framework is important. Second is, this trilateral China, Pakistan, Afghanistan. I think 7 sessions have already taken place. A lot of consensus was achieved in the last session a couple of months ago. I think that is another platform, because you and I know that unlike the 1990s Taliban regime, this one does not have any recognition, including from us, the way 3 countries had recognized last time. So there has to be an alternative mechanism so that they should have a greater stake in this regional process. And I think the last one, which is obviously there are 57 Muslim countries, and the OIC in the Islamabad summit of OIC foreign ministers last March, made a lot of commitment, although the Afghan foreign minister was not there. But OIC is one large Muslim, intra-Muslim platform with which, we can use that platform to engage the Taliban. So there are multiple avenues available for us. Problem is that both Islamic State Khorasan province as well as TTP, allegedly they have their safe havens and bases in Afghanistan. And as long as they are operating from there, obviously it's a matter of deep concern for Pakistan. And I think this concern has to be addressed amicably and quickly.
All right. Farrukh, do you think that the OSCE can possibly be taken as a way forward in terms of any sort of agreement and approach? Because it seems to be that we haven't really haven't found that consensus moving forward in terms of counter-terrorism efforts, particularly in Afghanistan.
Agreement with whom? TTA or TTP?
Among themselves, with the Afghan Taliban.
Right, Sarah, so I'm really grateful at this moment that unlike this situation 1.5 years ago, when there was clearly a divided house in our country, our leadership seemed to be divided, and they had different ideological takes on the matter of talking to TTP, and that's why we ended up with the mess that was there. Now there is, unanimity of views, and there is absolute clarity. Remember that when the question was asked today, was put to the spokesman of Foreign Office, it is her job or the spokesperson's job to actually answer all the questions that are asked. Yeah. Otherwise, to be honest, I think situation is already very clear. The government of Pakistan has very clearly actually stated that it is not going to negotiate with TTP, no matter what, in the absence of a surrender to Pakistani state, accepting Pakistani constitution, and after surrender they can actually talk, right? This is a great point. Unlike the previous time when we thought that we kept on talking about some kind of compromise and that was never forthcoming. The second thing is, I think that there have been changes within the Afghan interim government, and we have seen that Prime Minister actually changed. Now after that the direction has also changed. We are told that very clearly in the tug of war between Pakistan and TTP, they have chosen, the interim Afghan government have chosen Pakistan as the ally, right? When that happens, that means that TTP will not be allowed that kind of leeway that was there. Now OIC can do many things, and I believe that they can do even magic with their influence and their monies, right?
Okay.
But I don't think we need intervention of OIC right now. There was some kind of influence cloud that was used with the TTA, I think, in the recent past, where the Arab countries prevailed to convince TTA that their lot or their future actually lies with Pakistan's cooperation, right?
Right.
With that kind of a situation, I don't think that TTP is going to find any breathing space anywhere now.
All right. Thank you very much, Farrukh. Thank you very much, Dr. Ishtiaq, for joining us, and thank you, Mr. Jauhar Saleem, for being part of the discussion. There is, of course, a lot that we still need to see and prioritize both at a national and international level, and we hope that we're able to convince the international stakeholders as to what is going on around the world and where they need to focus more on. But that's all that we have from the show at the moment. Have a nice weekend. We'll see you Monday.